Hi, today we're with Sue Jones, and Sue and her husband Steve have been at Crossview for a little while, but some of you may not know them, and some of you have told me you know them and love them dearly. So I'm just really impressed. Sue is a missionary and nurse and has a humongous heart for um, people in service. And so, Sue, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, Cindy. I thought I'd tell a little bit of a story about how Steve and I got to Snohomish. Steve had recently retired and we needed something to do, so we bought a historic home in Snohomish in March of 2019 and took on this huge project of renovating a 112-year-old house. And for other people that live in Snohomish, this is probably no big deal, but for us, it's been quite interesting. We have both had a lot of loss during our lives, and we were looking for a grief share group. So we looked at grief share online, and Crossview came up, and we started attending grief share and found a church home at Crossview. So we've been attending a little more than a year. Because we already had children and grandchildren in the area, we decided to move my mom from Whidbey Island to Snohomish Health and Rehab last June. And I was first called to be a missionary in 1976. My late husband, William, and I went to the Urbana Missions Conference, and Billy Graham and Elizabeth Elliott were the keynote speakers. And we responded to the altar call given by Billy Graham to become missionaries. We already knew we were headed in that direction, but the conference made it really clear to us. But we had a lot of work cut out for us. We didn't have enough of the right kind of education, and we didn't have a mission agency, and we hadn't raised support. So 11 years later, William finished college, I finished nursing school. He got a seminary degree in theology from Fuller Seminary. We had two little boys, joined a mission agency and raised support. And in 1987, we packed up and went off to language school in Costa Rica to prepare to be missionaries in Guatemala. And multiple things happened to us during that first year, and some tragedies. A little boy died right in front of me in the street, and I tried to resuscitate him. We lost other people. A lot of challenges happened. William began to struggle in language school and became severely depressed. And it got to the point where I called out for help to our mission agency, who brought us home for what we thought was 6 weeks of counseling. And we lived at a residential center for missionaries who were struggling. And it was there that we learned that there's a lot more pain in every missionary story than what you hear when they come speak at your church or in their regular newsletters. And we weren't the only ones that were struggling. And a lot of years went by before the 6 week sabbatical or furlough, whatever you want to call it, to get some counseling and some rest, turned into 15 years. And during that time, we had 8 different people in our family pass away. But we had the privilege of seeing most of them come to Christ. The ones that didn't already know the Lord came to the Lord during that time frame. So we knew that our being sidelined from missions had a purpose to it, but we just didn't quite understand all of it. Mm-hmm. And we were able to educate our kids and see them through Christian college and get married. And after our nest was empty, we prepared again to go off to the mission field and left in 2003. So we lived in Guatemala from 2003 to 2007 and did a lot of different things. It was a dream come true for us to finish that first term that we got interrupted from. But once again, we ran into a lot of loss and difficult things. Our lives were in danger every day. Mm-hmm. There was just a lot of chronic stress, living in a pretty violent place, and we saw a lot of death. I bought a lot of little tiny caskets for my patients because a lot of children die of hunger It's not uncommon for a woman to have given birth to 10 children and only have 5 survive to adulthood.
Wow.
So we began to see that it's not just spiritual care and not just physical care that people need, but mental health care.
Mhm.
And William suffered a second serious depressive episode. So we came back to the United States again in 2007 and felt like we needed to stay a while. And during that time frame, I started teaching for the University of Washington, and he was diagnosed with cancer shortly after we returned. And we kind of found um, some purposeful work for ourselves in encouraging other missionaries, both remotely and over the phone, visiting people in person or having them into our home. We had missionaries from Afghanistan visit us, missionaries with YWAM visit us, all people that felt safe to share because we were pretty honest about how hard things had been for us and where we got help.
We don't often think, Sue, about our pastors and our missionaries needing that kind of care. So I'm glad you're sharing this.
Yeah. So in 2010, William and I bought a house on a lake on Whidbey Island. And sadly, he passed away just 8 weeks after we bought that house. And I was like, Lord, what am I going to do with this house and this space? And I'm all by myself in it. And within weeks, there was a pastor and his wife and 3 children that needed a place to stay. And a series of people were referred to me that needed a place to stay. So we've had missionaries and pastors from different countries, from different states, come stay at what we've called Shalom at the Lake, peace at the lake. And a house that seemed to have no purpose has had a second life after William's death. And I've had a second life in that God provided Steve for me. We got married in June of 2011. And he was very supportive of using the house as a ministry center for people that need it. And he was also very supportive of the ongoing work in Guatemala. So he's been to Guatemala with me many times, went 2 times a year for several years because it seemed like there was always some kind of crisis or fire to put out. We built a nutrition, education, and health center in a Mayan village. And it always seemed to be that the missionaries were the ones having the biggest trouble.
Wow.
But we went to encourage staff as well. And so after several years of commuting to the mission field, commuting to visit Steve in California, him spending summers with me in Washington, and I was caring for my elderly parents, that I felt the need to take a sabbatical. And I wanted to go back to school to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I was already board certified in family practice for 20 years. But I felt like, I left out that I started a private practice on Whidbey Island after William passed away. And I called it integrated family practice because I wanted to be able to pray for people. I wanted to be able to meet emotional and mental health needs as well as provide primary care. And Whidbey's a rural setting and it's hard to access care. So I felt like I was a missionary on Whidbey Island. It was lovely, but I was getting more mental health patients than I felt trained to handle. So I went back to school through the California State University system, and I'm 9 weeks away from finishing my board certification in psychiatry. So what we hope to do with this is continue being a support to people in ministry or people through church or families needing somebody to talk to. And I also will practice part-time in Everett in a counseling practice and provide medication management as well as therapy and incorporate Jesus for the patients that want to hear about the Lord.
Yes, that's great. tell us a little bit about your nonprofit.
After William and I came back from Costa Rica and then Guatemala the first time, we said we weren't going to go back until we could go back full time. And the Lord kept working on my heart. We had moved to Seattle after a couple of years of being back in California. And through Seattle Christian schools, I got talked into short-term medical missions. And when my father passed away in 1995, we felt led to, rather than giving money to another charity, to found a nonprofit in his memory. It's called Mano con Mano Health Reach. And it's a nonprofit organization that started out encouraging pastors and missionaries and doing short-term medical and dental teams. Later, it supported us in Guatemala in 2003 to 2007, and we still support the work in Guatemala, a church plant in Mexico, and Steve and I have had the privilege of traveling and visiting missionaries and just listening to people. We just got back at the very beginning of COVID, working with missionaries that help people escape from the sex trafficking industry. And as you can imagine, those missionaries are pretty exhausted from hearing a lot of very painful stories.
Very violent thing to have to hear.
Yes.
And a witness.
Yes. Yes. So there's a whole field of study called vicarious trauma, because whatever trauma we go through settles in our bodies, not just our minds. And so a lot of people become physically ill from working with others having traumatic experiences. And missionaries and pastors need care for all the trauma they help people with.
That is just wonderful. I just thank you so much for sharing this with us today. I think it's good for us to support our missionaries and our pastors in ways that we haven't even thought of before. So you are a blessing.
Oh, thank you. So
thank you so much.
Family.
Yes, it'll be good when we can all be together again.
Yes.
For sure. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Cindy.